meant to mention that on an earlier slide, in Colorado, we have cities buying up farms to get the water so they can increase the population of the cities. Well, where's the water going to come from to grow the food? It's a major problem in this state of water. Is it go for to increase the population, or is it go to support food supply? Okay. As one of my students says, your talks are always so depressing. But, so fossil fuel use. 17% of fossil fuels in the food system. Making fertilizer, making pesticides, transportation, processing food, but it's a significant percentage of the fossil fuel we use. And so as fossil fuel prices go up, it inevitably is going to affect the price of food. We use 3 gallons or 3 calories of fossil fuel for every calorie of food on average. I will show you one slide. So one advantage of organic is it tends to use less energy. Now, and some of my friends that support local, I think local is great, and I think there's lots of good reasons to buy local, and we'll talk about some of them. I don't think saving transportation costs or energy is one of them. Because transportation is only about 11% of this 17%. So maybe 2% of fossil fuel in the food system is used, or maybe 2% of fossil fuel is used for transportation. But larger transports, boats, trains, are very efficient. They move a lot of food for not much energy. You get down, more planes, you get down to pickup trucks or SUVs moving food, that's not very efficient. Okay? The most inefficient part of the system is us. We get in the car and drive to the store to get a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. That's a real inefficient transport of food calories. Okay? So it's not, a lot of the transportation is not the food system per se, it's the consumer. These slides, the paired bars, the one on the right is organic. The first one is wheat and the rest are vegetables, but across the board, every crop that was looked at, this is a UK study, organic uses less energy. And a lot of that has to do with the fertilizer. Okay, so they're not buying fertilizer that took a lot of energy to make, they're using green crops and manure. And they're not using pesticides, which also takes a fair amount of energy. So it's not so much the production on the ground, it's the inputs that gives them a big advantage. Oil for protein, and I'm not really trying, especially in Colorado, I'm not really trying to attack the meat industry per se, but there are some issues. So this is kilocalories of fuel, fossil fuel per kilocalorie of protein. And you can see that broilers and turkeys are fairly efficient, 3:10 to 1, but you get into eggs and beef and it's pretty high. So a lot of the oil, and again, it's the fertilizer. It's the fertilizer for the feed. It's not that the animal is using the oil, it's growing the corn and soybeans that we use to feed the crop. Grass-fed, on the other hand, is about half the fossil fuel. So we use some for hay and forage, but the grass-fed will tend to require a lot less energy. Now, the trade-off is when you don't get as much meat in a given period of time on grass-fed compared to concentrated on animal feeding operations. So it takes longer for the animal to get to market weight. You can't grow as many animals on a given amount of property or land. So the trade-off is less meat, and as you know, grass-fed tends to be more expensive. So you have a trade-off in cost. Asparagus, farm-raised or wild-caught? That sounds like my humor. Okay. Try and lighten it. This was a study also out of Europe. Life cycle assessment, relative effect of meat versus soy protein. So we want to give an amount of protein. It's either going to be vegetable protein or animal protein. So how much land does it take? 11 times as much land for the meat. 15 times as much water. 12, 13 times as much oil. And 7 times as much phosphate. Okay, so it's the way we raise animals that drives this. Not you can raise animals differently that wouldn't put quite so much demand on it. Pounds of grain or soy. So how much grain do we have to feed to get a pound of meat? And these numbers, if you look at different researchers, there's going to be a range, but the trend is pretty similar. That beef takes a lot. Pork and turkey and broilers take a lot less, which is why the first CAFOs tended to be poultry and pork, because there was a pretty efficient conversion, 3 to 1 in the case of the broilers. And fish is around 1 to 1. Now, this is herbivorous fish. And Lester Brown, in his book Plan 4B to Save Humanity, he argues that in a way, fish may be more efficient than soy. That if you feed fish, herbivorous fish, so not salmon or trout, but carp, tilapia, catfish, that they are so efficiently convert corn to protein, and corn is a more efficient crop than soy, that we might be better off growing corn to feed fish than trying to get protein directly from soy. So I'll try one more time. We use a free-range chicken and suicidal veal. And this was also out of Lester Brown's book, looking at grain use versus how many people could be fed with that grain. So in India, and the values are different. This is 200 kilograms of grain per year in India. And that's the average use. And if everybody used it that way, you could feed 10 billion people. In Italy, they eat more meat than India, and they eat fish, but they eat a lot less meat than we do. So the way they use grain, we could feed about 5 billion people. The way we use grain, which we use 800 kilograms of grain per person, we can only feed 2.5 billion people in the United States. This is partly because 25% of our corn goes to what? Fossil fuel, or not fossil fuel, to ethanol. In my opinion, it's insane to take food and make it into gasoline. And it's not very efficient. It's great for the farmers. They make a lot of money doing it. But as an environmental solution, it's insane. And 60% of our grain goes to animal feed. So 80% or so goes either to gasoline or animal feed, and therefore we don't get to feed as many people. There is just no way the rest of the world can live like we do. It's impossible. Okay? And people that say otherwise are just fooling themselves. So, just to be controversial, James Williams, if you want to make a statement, ride your bike to the farmer's market. If you want to reduce greenhouse gases, become a vegetarian. And I'm not arguing that, I'm just saying I think we should cut back and we should think about how our meat is raised. Because I don't think it's sustainable the way we do it. There's been food riots all over the world in the last 4 or 5 years. Just a couple of them: Egypt, Argentina, Philippines, India. If you're spending 50% of your income on food and food prices go up, that's a problem. And we have enough food, in theory. I mean, even the conservative estimates are there's 2,500 to 3,500 calories produced per person worldwide, which is plenty. Now, I think where they kind of soft pedal the caveats for that is that yes, but there's always waste. 16 to 20% or more of food goes to waste, sometimes more than that. We have distribution issues. So yes, we produce the food, lots of corn in the United States, but trying to get it to somewhere in Africa is problematic. We use a lot for feed. So a lot of this doesn't go to people, it goes to feed. Economics. If you have money, you have food. And if you don't have money, you don't. We have a global system. They gave us free coffee today, but if you stopped at Starbucks, most of us would spend $2 for a cup of coffee, which we have the type of coffee, we don't need the latte, etc. 40% of the world's population, that's 2 billion people, make $2 a day or less. They can't compete in the global food supply. They can't compete with people that can spend $2 on a cup of coffee. We spend more than that on our pets. And unfortunately, the world population, it's slowing, but it's still moving in the wrong direction. And I can't see here. 2010, so we're around 7 billion. And part of now on the one hand, the developed countries are being a smaller percentage. So back in the 60s, we were about 33% of the population, developed countries, not just the United States. And in 2010, we're 16%?